and welcome to yet another episode of the MetaDev Corner. Truth be told, we've done a bunch of these back to back, and I think we're starting to run on fumes creatively, but it doesn't matter, we still wanna see this through before the holidays, regardless of when this comes out and when it gets published. So for today we have this interesting thing that has to do with public speaking. You know, the pros and the cons, the interesting details of, doing public speaking and so forth. So, as always, there's Boro here with me.
Hello. Cool. I guess we can start by asking what is actually public speaking and why should people do it? What's the incentive behind it?
I mean, there are plenty of different incentives for sure, but the most common ones I feel like source me, trust me bro, are either self-promotion or sharing knowledge or marketing purposes or trying to promote a product. So let's say we can probably generalize them even further as sharing something or promotion of some kind. So from a very large big picture view, those would probably be the most common ones.
I guess personally, I have my biggest preference is knowledge sharing. But I agree with you that I've seen a lot of different use cases and incentives for doing public speaking. I guess another interesting question is what types of public speaking are there? Like, what are the forms? There are like conference speaking. There are things like speaking at a local hacker space or speaking in a university. So I'm curious on your take as the more experienced person in this room on these different types of forums and whether you have any preferences on any of those.
Frankly, my favorite type of speaking in public, if we can categorize them that way, as you've mentioned, is probably the more informal kinds. Because for a couple of reasons, like you can be a bit more relaxed and be more spontaneous with what you're trying to share as an idea. And I feel like you're sort of more connected to the audience when you're less formal. You're not really this person that's, trying to teach them something. Think academia, for example.
Right.
You're just this person that's trying to share something that they've learned in an informal way and maybe spread an idea. The most interesting thing about those informal presentations is that, to me, the primary value is entertainment. So, but the secondary thing is like the spread of just this maybe single idea that maybe takes root into people's minds and maybe something happens, some sort of a change, whether it's a techie thing, whether it's something like back when we talked about DevX, we had this split presentation and, any DevX, whatever, is sort of unknown in these parts and we're trying to spread the idea and awareness. So primarily to avoid the questions, what the hell is it that your guys are doing? So, stuff like that. But I digress. Plus, there is another reason why I prefer the more informal settings. I have the habit of swearing like a pirate, and sometimes I can't really control myself. So, it's a bit less stressful for me and regardless of audience size, my anxiety levels don't exactly rise with the size of the audience, I think.
Right. I definitely resonate with that. One of my earliest public speaking experiences were actually in academia setup, where I had to defend my thesis, and it's exactly the points you outlined. There is a particular structure that you need to follow. So you are presenting the topic, you are defending it, and then the expectation is that the mentors, the professors will ask you a couple of questions. But to be honest, at the time, it was one of my first, let's quote unquote, public speaking experiences. At the time, it felt like a good experience, but now, having had the experience mostly with you on the informal part of public speaking in informal setups, I definitely prefer that one more than the typical, conference /formal/academia.
Yeah. I mean, even conferences. I think that even conferences can be classified as either less formal or more
Oh, right.
formal.
Yeah.
So there's like those more uptight businessy conferences which, have these demands and require your presentation in a certain template and crap like that, which usually like seriously pisses me off, especially when I'm done with the presentation. And then there's this person comes and says something along the lines of, hey, but you need to use the template, and they just didn't inform me that there was a template in the first place. So weird things like that. So yeah, informal conferences that are sort of working with you, not trying to put you in a box and make you work inside a template, are the ones I really prefer as well. Like I could probably make a case for those having the same vibe as meetups, essentially.
Right. I definitely share that bias with you.
Cool.
So, speaking of experience, I remember it was actually you, Darko, the person who kind of broke the ice for me. The first public speaking that I remember was at the second actually Beer.js, I believe, here in Skopje, almost 7 or 8 years ago. And all of these things are out there on YouTube. So just the other day I was just like, watching them, see how I basically spoke back then and how I changed it until today. So it was definitely a great experience, just like, starting to do that, thanks to you mostly. And for me, the reason why I asked you the incentive question is, for me, the biggest incentive in doing this was first to share some knowledge.
Yep.
And share my ideas or opinions or whatever. And secondly, improve my communication skills.
Yep.
I think communication skills are a huge part of especially public speaking. And since you also mentioned entertainment, this is something that I myself am actively working on. I'm still I consider myself as the worst storyteller. And I think it's a very valuable skill to, beyond the things like you learned a particular technology or have some idea or opinion to share. If it's not engaging or you don't engage your audience in a way, if you don't pack it up as a story and make it interesting, then in this case, the most interesting idea can be, people will not even listen to it.
Yeah, it wouldn't like capture the interest of the audience for sure. Like that's where the entertainment part comes in. Like it has to be fun for the audience, for them to, be more receptive to certain ideas. I mean, sure, there are the types of conferences and, general gatherings that are more formal by nature. And like people go there to get like formally educated. Let's get some sort of a degree outside of an academia or something like that. But the entertainment part still stands even there. Like I've had better experiences with learning from people that were actually entertaining opposed to the other kind that weren't. So not everybody has to be like a stand-up comedian,
right?
But at least if you're trying to teach something, try not to make it boring for the people you're teaching it to.
And this is not an easy topic. I mean, you have to know your audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are a few tricks I learned from you, like how to, by asking questions, raising hands, things like that, just like get some insight into what the audience is. It's like mostly marketing people, mostly HR, but it's definitely a complex topic.
Yeah,
but back to the previous discussion, what is your first public speaking experience and what are your takeaways from that?
We just discussed this before we started recording this episode, and I think, and if my memory serves right, it was probably somewhere in high school. Like I've had like this, kindergarten things when I did remember those, that I had to get out and read something in front of people. That's probably my earliest memory, like being in front of a bunch of people. But my more serious ones were probably somewhere in high school where I had to give some history this or that presentation in front of a bunch of people with some slides, and that was probably the first one. My first IT related one was probably somewhere around 2009 or 2010, something like that. I don't exactly remember. And it had to do with some kind of a CSS framework, but I don't exactly remember which one was it. It was either like SAS or less or something like that. I'm really blurry on the details there. And it was at that point that I realized that, hey, I'm enjoying this, man. Like, come on. I was pretty like anxious, when I got started with it, but that quickly went away. I realized I'm not exactly camera shy. There's like that 20-second awkwardness when you first get in front of people or in front of a camera, but beyond that, you could put like 20 around me. I don't care at that point pretty much. But yeah, it's probably that one. How about you?
Okay, yeah. So beyond the academical defense of the thesis that I mentioned, I would consider my first one IT related on the second Beer.js Skopje, which was in 2017, if I recall correctly. And since you mentioned anxiety, that's exactly the thing that I wanted to bring as well. I'm happy that you had the chance to get by that so quickly, but to me it was something that was there for a very long time. Including in future after the 2017 in subsequent conferences. So it was a thing that I constantly struggled with, and it was basically obsessing me. So usually the first 10 minutes were the most critical, but then once I got the engine started, just start speaking, things became much easier.
Yeah.
But I distinctly remember breaking that particular ice about anxiety. For me, what really worked well is actually pair public speaking with you in 2023 on DevCon.
We had one previous to that one on the WP meetup.
On the WP meetup,
yes.
Yeah. We basically spoke about DevX and...
Yes, that was sort of the trial run for the conference.
Right. Yeah. And I figured out, okay, actually, if I have a person sitting next to me on the stage, I'm pretty good with the audience, no matter how large it is. And this was very, it was a very good experience for me, because now I feel like once I learned the thing that I can visualize to help me beat anxiety, I feel like the next time I am doing a solo public speaking, I can just imagine that you are there or some other person is with me on the stage. And this particular trick really helped me. But
I can print you a cutout. That's cool.
I would really appreciate that. Or would prefer for you to be actually there. But
that's fine.
Yeah. Sure. But yeah, that's my experience, and I assume many people will be, depending on the person, like you yourself had like very easy time with anxiety. But for myself, I had to go through several kind of runs and finally learn the trick.
Yeah.
And obviously other things like you and I discussed, like I'm like, you face the audience, but who do you watch? Like do you focus on some particular person? So I distinctly remember this trick that you shared with me, and you never watch people in the eyes, or you never you just like imagine a line, and you just like scan through that line with your eyes. So it's things like this that I found very valuable, and definitely help and improve my communication skills as well, not beyond just like public speaking, but really, really valuable experience. So the incentive for me was exactly, share knowledge, but also improve communication skills.
Yeah. And certainly, like, it's for me, I'm not sure whether it's fair to call it a secondary value. It's quite possibly a primary value. Confirming that you actually, for yourself, confirming that you have truly learned something.
Right.
Like, having the courage or mastering the courage to speak in public comes with the assumption that you know what you're talking about. And in order to know what you're talking about, you really have to like spend the time to truly understand the thing you're trying to teach other people. So that's an additional motivator for me. When I'm trying to really learn something, I'll take Astro as an example because it's probably one of my favorite ones. I've done to date probably 3 or 4 presentations on Astro. And I was most motivated to talk about Astro during the time I was learning about Astro in depth. So I understood a certain aspect of it, and I was immediately inspired to start writing about it, start building stuff from it, and ultimately like sort of present what you've learned to other people. And you have to go through 3 different modularities of understanding the thing. And it sort of really shows you like a mirror whether you know something or not. We discussed this briefly in like the mentorship and learning episode we did, but it applies here as well. This is a learning tool as much as it is a teaching tool, I would say.
Yeah, completely agree. And especially for things like the Q&A.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not always possible, depending on the audience mostly.
Yeah, of course. And the organizers and
not always possible to give answers to all the questions, but definitely having a deeper understanding of the topic and having deeply learned more about it will help you nail down the Q&A session, which is, in my opinion, the most interesting bit of the speaking, because it also tells how much the audience was engaged and whether they found the content useful, something new. So a little bit of shameless plug here. The DevX talk we held at the DevCon, I think there were like more than 5 or 6 questions, and most of the questions started with like, well, this is great, we had no idea what DevX is about, and this sounds like something that is really useful. And there were really good questions which just showed how engaged the audience was, and I think that's probably the best reward for any speaker.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, knowing that the people were actually interested in what you had to say. And it also is applicable to when people try to find you after, like, you've given the speech.
Yeah.
And try to ask further questions, whether they're like either shy to ask them in public or whatever reason. And that's, to me, feels really rewarding. Like having a meaningful discussion about your thing, what you were trying to say, with somebody that, just wants to talk about it without any, additional incentives, whether it's like t-shirts or swag for questions or stuff like that. So that's like even more rewarding for me personally.
Yeah. And I mean, definitely, assuming that most people are speaking on a topic they personally love or have deep interest in, and then having shared the sort of like the story behind that, the content, and seeing more and more people connect with you on the same topic, I think is a very, very big reward for myself, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we should probably discuss the more, let's say, commercial angle to this. Like, I've seen that people that have speaker in their profile are significantly like more hired more easily than, people that don't have a speaker in their LinkedIn line written. So there is value in doing that, of course, if you're trying to promote yourself better, if you're trying to get employed easily, because like being on a stage gives people the impression that you're an authority on a certain topic. And it can certainly help with any kind of employment. I mean, for me personally, I'm not sure whether it helped at any point for any sort of job I was either contacted or applied or whatever. How about you? Did any kind of public speaking help you with, professional development?
Right. I mean, very good question. Like I mentioned earlier, communication skills, definitely. Beating the anxiety and, feeling more comfortable talking to people. And this also includes asking questions, not just like me doing the public speaking part, but also when I'm in the audience, I will have like a very, strong heartbeat, and I'm like, well, should I ask this question or not? And I feel like all of that has been, sort of has gone away. But on a more, so that's the soft skills part. For the improving my communication means a lot of things, right? So this also means when I'm speaking to a coworker about some particular problem. So I kind of use a subset of the presentation skills that I have gained, and reuse it in a fashion where, or also during pair programming, seeing how they react to what I say, and getting some feedback and things like that. So it's definitely helped tons, and just adding more breadth to my skill set, and I feel like this breadth has affected other other nodes in this tree as well, and has improved them. It mostly revolves around communication, but I also, I think also like just having the courage to go and speak to people, and not be afraid of that. This is this was a personal struggle, so this is why I share it. It comes from experience. So those, I would say, are the main points. And now, obviously, things I shared earlier, because I consider you as the more experienced person, like, the tricks about raising hands, asking the audience questions, where to, to focus your eyes on, all of those things. But also the storytelling bit, which I'm now, sort of, as I was reflecting on the past talks that we gave together, it also gave me the opportunity to reflect and see what else is there that I can improve. Like the storytelling bit I shared earlier, and, obvious things like creating a presentation, preparing for that, like you and I did. So the preparation aspect is also, depending on the topic, of course. If it's like a heavy technical presentation where you had worked with it in the past and you have like a strong, good understanding of that, maybe you don't need that much for preparation. But for some talks, you actually do need to prepare, and actually need to, do like demos and record yourself and see how you look.
Like rehearsals sometimes are necessary.
Right.
I don't always rehearse, but if I'm more, let's say, intimidated by the topic I'm trying to present, I am going to rehearse a bit more than usually.
So the other important thing I learned, and my wife also like gave me a hard time about that, whenever you're doing public speaking, you're just like making these weird gestures with your hands or whatever. And when I actually saw myself doing that during a rehearsal with you, I'm like, I actually need to change this. This doesn't look good even to me, So yeah, giving the opportunity to, it really gave me the opportunity to learn more about myself, learn what are the things that I want to improve, and become a better speaker, and hopefully, transfer the amount of information or communicate the information that I have with the audience in a much, much better way. So helped me with tons of stuff. I guess that's the TLDR.
But never like exactly with being hired or like getting a job or a gig or something like that.
I mean, definitely the skills, like, like I mentioned, communication has improved. So when when I applied at Automatic, of course, the interviewer would ask me some questions, and I'm like, well, I will answer this in a particular way. So all of those skills came, or subset of those came from public speaking experience.
Right.
So I'm imagining like this person and the way I would communicate with them. And there are many intersections between communication with, with audience and communication with a smaller group and communication one-on-one. But also, there are many intersections, and also there are parts that do not intersect. But I feel like, definitely help with getting hired easy. Focusing on what are the things that you should share, what are the things that should be interested with the audience of one in case of hiring. So obviously, you don't want to make a presentation of something that is completely unrelated to the hirer, or in the case of a conference, you don't go to a...
So filtering information is what I'm hearing, probably.
you give topics in a particular conference that have some amount of intersection or commonalities.
Yeah.
And you don't go to a PHP conference and talk about I don't know, the functional programming. I'm just kidding.
We were getting flack for that
PHP
one.
is my first language, so I use it on a daily basis. But you just like want to have your topic as close as possible to the audience, and this also involves hiring, like you mentioned, definitely. But it also helped with, like I mentioned earlier, pair programming. Whenever we pair, sometimes or the mentorship sessions, sometimes they are very vague, but sometimes we talk on a particular topic. So you have to line up with this. And I feel like this is a skill that I have gained, as sort of a level of awareness that I have gained by breaking the ice and doing public speaking.
So there's like this one thing you mentioned that I think that could be sort of shared as a tip. Whenever you're trying to rehearse for a presentation, don't talk in front of a mirror, record yourself.
Right.
Most of us have, like, let's say most of us is an understatement. Virtually everybody has a phone of some kind, and you don't need this like super fancy camera. Speak in front of the camera, record yourself, and it really, really helps see yourself in a different light, in a more realistic light. And see the things that might seem awkward to an audience. See how you're trying to pronounce certain things. See where you're getting stuck when you're trying to convey certain ideas. It's more valuable than speaking in front of a mirror. Of course, a mirror helps, but this is sort of superior, at least in our experience so far.
Right. And if you speak in front of a mirror, you also cannot imagine target audience.
Yeah.
But I feel like a big part of our rehearsals were when we just imagine the target audience, and you're basically talking to a wall, but it's a target audience.
Yeah, of course.
And it really helps you, deliver the message as if you were on stage. And I would add to that, that's a great tip. I would also add to that, get feedback from many different people.
Yeah.
So my wife, I mentioned, is non-technical, but her feedback was very valuable about my weird gestures or whatever things that it, which I wasn't even aware of them. And she's like, "Look at Darko, he's like owning the stage, and you're like, doing these things with your hands or whatever." And this is really good feedback, It's and when I watched the video, the rehearsal, and I'm like, what am I doing with these hands? I can control my hands, so should not do those things. And it's an invaluable skill. If I had to summarize that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, cool. Yeah, I would agree that any kind of feedback, especially from people that aren't necessarily in your branch of industry or aren't even technical, is valuable feedback, because those are the people that will probably catch the things that are outside of what you're trying to talk about. So, for example, if somebody that's like your wife, that's not into any sort of programming, she would probably focus more on your gesturing, on your movement, pronunciation, and stuff like that, opposed to the content itself.
Right.
So there's value in there as well. Like, just ask somebody for honest feedback. The closer they are to you, the more harsh the feedback will be. But we are trying to improve here, right? So
and actually this reminded me of the talk that we gave at the WordCamp Skopje, which was about headless WordPress. And I remember, while you were working on the presentation, figuring out colors and things like that. So this is all behind the scenes things. And one particular thing that we discussed was, what will the audience be like? So WordCamp, just a bit context, it has a huge diversity in population. So it's not only developers, there are also like SEO, marketing folks, HR, whatnot.
Content writers.
And, keeping this in mind, I remember discussing it with you. what if the audience is like most of the people are marketing? So our talk was basically very technical, but we also added some bits to it so that it will make it more interesting to marketing.
Yeah.
So going back to to the thing you mentioned about it's basically having a diverse feedback, but also having the intention that your audience will be diverse, and framing your presentation in such a way that it will be interesting for other people other than the technical folks, for other types of jobs out there as well. And I feel like this can, and this is the thing that I feel I'm missing the most, like the storytelling part, because when I talk about a particular technical thing, I very easily get lost into the technicalities, and I forget that, wait, maybe some person in the audience is not technical, so should kind of, make maybe some analogies about how this would work in marketing or how it would work in HR or whatever. So I feel like in this presentation, I got this perspective from you that, let's try to put some words for marketing folks so that they can understand the content as well. And I feel like it definitely helped with conveying the information with a larger audience.
Yeah, but that the audience thing really depends on the type of event and the organizer and who they're trying to pitch the event to. So prepare for dealing with diverse audiences, I would say. Like, try to maybe find the lowest common denominator for everybody in the audience. Like, what is it that I can say that everybody will understand, at least on a conceptual level, before I start diving in.
Right.
So some conferences I've seen, like, they attach tags to their presentations sometimes. Like, this is a presentation for seniors, this is a presentation for more junior people, this is a technical, this is a conceptual, and so forth. It could be helpful, sure, but I think that for a huge part of the presentations we're doing in general, you can adapt. You can adapt to a certain conceptual level so that everybody gets at least some value out of what they're seeing. They don't have to like understand the really nitty-gritty parts of everything, but they have a certain takeaway out of it. So, all right. I wanted to start digging into the technicalities. So I have a question. What makes a good presentation? Like, for Boro, who's in the audience and watching something, what makes a good presentation?
I mean, that's a very tricky question to start with. So first, there is the aspect of people attending conferences. And personally, I'm obviously attending conferences to watch some of the presentations, but also there is the people kind of stuff. So you go to a conference to connect with people. I think it's the best space to do that. But putting that aside, if I were to go and just like listen to talks, I would say recently, first, it's very contextual and based on what my current interests are at the moment. So recently, I don't know, the things that I enjoyed the most are around like things like the one that was on the last Birges, Stoyan with RFCs and things like that. So this is a really good this was a really good presentation to me, because it's something that we are also tackling at the moment within the company. But on a more technical level, I don't know, in the past I really loved technical presentations. And right now it also depends on the speaker, I should mention. But if it's a strictly technical presentation where only the technology is shared, here is how it works, here is what you can do with that, etc. I think those are one Google away things. But if it's a speaker like yourself, where you take Astro and you put it in as little words possible, you explain it in as little words as possible, and you also package it in within an interesting story. This is a presentation I would enjoy. following. But so yeah, those two things, I guess, if it's really connected with the problems that I'm trying to figure out right now, and how good of a storyteller the speaker is.
Yeah, those are always like good, sure. Especially the storytelling part. For me personally, that's always like entertaining. The thing I really like most is I have this simple. It's not a rule. It's more of a wish, I suppose. Don't make me work for what you're trying to say. That's like.
Can you unpack that?
Yeah, of course. Like there are some presentations with really complex ideas.
Okay.
And like there are presentations with complex ideas that have a simple takeaway. And there are presentations with complex ideas that you have to like spend some amount of time, a certain time investment, so that you can properly understand what the speaker is trying to say. Not every idea is simplifiable, but most ideas can be broken down into simpler ideas that can be presented like in multiple presentations, or maybe a presentation isn't the most proper format for that thing. So the thing I really hate is when a speaker is making me work for what they're trying to say.
So you're speaking from an audience standpoint.
Yes, from the audience
I
standpoint,
definitely agree with that. Yeah, and but at the same time, yeah, complex ideas for sure. But at the same time, I feel like if a person is a good storyteller and found ways to use something, even the most boring and the most simple idea can be made interesting, because storytelling usually helps me make an analogies of an idea, so it also makes me learn about a particular, and also learn more about the person, how they're owning the audience and things like that. But speaking strictly for complex ideas, and where the complexity is not very well transferred to the audience, I completely agree. And if you have a way to make it, almost always you have a way to make a complex idea easily digestible. Of course, there are always like the can of worms and things like that, but the interest people in the audience can always dig deeper. So if you leave them with something like, hey, this does this, and then if they are interested, they can go and dig deeper, that's always a plus.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've seen, for example, it just popped into my mind a presentation about what virtual DOM is and how the virtual DOM works. Like it was explained in a very simple way. Like you have the DOM. Most of us like know what the DOM is at presentations, but that person explained it in a way that was sort of understandable for even junior people that were in the audience. Like, it's a way for us to interface with what's on the page. Essentially, that's it. It's an API that allows you to manipulate elements, yada, yada, yada. Now we have a shadow, a shadow, mix the two. Virtual DOM. We have a virtual DOM that that started existing for the sole reason that we had some very specific performance problems to solve. And we started to have this like virtualization of the existing DOM, which allows us to do certain operations faster. That's why it exists. This is how it works. It does this diffing thing, and the actual DOM does a similar diffing thing. And the takeaway was pretty simple. Like you were able to understand what it is and why it exists. So, but virtual DOMs are generally like a sort of a complex thing. You really like need some more, let's say, experience or understanding of certain concepts to really dig into them deeply. But at a conceptual level, like, I mean, even for juniors, it's enough. Like, at least they would be able to have an informed conversation with somebody that was interested about the concept or the topic. Yeah,
definitely. That's a great example, because, the what, the why, and the how was shared on a very specific level. And public speaking is not a workshop. Public speaking can be considered if you are doing a workshop, but speaking at a conference is not a workshop.
Presentations are one thing. Workshops are a different format, and workshops are deeper by the definition of things. Like workshops can take hours, while presentations rarely run over half an hour. So it's the time constraint plus the depth you're able
Right.
to capture in that time.
Right. And this is a great example because, it specifically outlines the virtual DOM and the very crucial things it has, but it doesn't lose you in the technicalities.
Yeah, of course.
And I feel like workshops are a better place for losing people or actually engaging them in the technicalities. So start with a presentation like that and then maybe organize a workshop. And those interested to go deeper can, attend the workshop.
Of course, yes. And that way you sort of create a natural filter and you set the expectation for how deep this can go and whether you're at the level personally at which you can follow along.
Yep.
So yes, I agree to that.
And I made this mistake myself, in the past. I gave a talk about Idris, the programming language, and it was very technical, and but definitely lesson learned. And you always improve. So it's easy to make the mistake of turning your your presentation into a workshop.
Yeah.
So yeah, be careful for those.
Yeah, keep it simple, keep the ideas digestible, and you probably there's this tendency in people to overdo text and pictures in slides. You really don't need that much. Just the basic stuff, the rest you can just speak out. It's fine. Everything doesn't have to be on the slide. Use large fonts, use a decent contrast. Everything else is let's call it creative freedom, I guess.
Those are great tips. And one tip I found also very useful was, like you said, add as little text as possible, but never read the text and just that, and just leave it at that.
Never ever do
because, and I noticed this as myself as part of the audience, when somebody just kept reading the slides and moved to the next slide, this person lost me as an audience, and I just kept reading myself.
It gives you this signal that sort of the person might not be that much of an authority on the topic. Well, yeah. And sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes it might be anxiousness or stuff like that.
Right.
But this is all trained, and it's something that you can learn actually by practicing.
And once you figure out this person, authority definitely has something to do with it. But to me, my personal experience was, okay, this person is just reading, and my mind subconsciously ignores him and starts reading.
Switches in a different way.
And this is no way to lead a talk, because if it was like that, I would just go and read a book or something.
Exactly. Right? This is supposed to be different.
Right. And there are many other tips I learned. Another one that popped into my mind was not keeping a steady tone of the way you pronounce the words.
Yes.
So changing the tonality and things like that, because I noticed this myself, watching on YouTube or something like that, some particular presentation, and when the person's tone is constant, I feel like I receive less information than if it varies.
Yes, our ears and our brains like diversity,
Right.
stuff like the way I used to attend this speaking coach for a bit. And she gave me this great tip. She said, when you're practicing, practice as if you were telling a story to a small child. You have a kid.
Oh, nice.
And you're trying
85.
to act in voices, and you're trying to sort of characterize different characters. Do the same thing on stage. People find that interesting. Of course, it has to make sense. You're not really telling them a fairy tale. You're trying to, convey a technical idea maybe, but changing your voice, becoming a bit sarcastic, becoming sometimes funny, and so forth.
Yeah.
That really helps with primarily keeping them interested. You're not a stand-up comedian, of course. They don't have to laugh out loud, but make it interesting for them.
No, yeah, that's a very good point, and I feel like there is an effect of diminishing returns for every trick that you use. So things like raising hands.
Yeah,
you can
don't
do it
overdo
once or twice, but if you keep doing it, and the other thing you also mentioned about, including some humor, and definitely that could make the presentation more alive. But if you do it all the time, then it sort of gets into negative results.
Yeah.
So yeah, also another thing, just keep in mind that don't overdo all of the things. I guess.
Yes. Keep everything not overdone. I guess that's don't overdo anything. That's good. Like people get bored. Like the audience gets bored from the potential repetition. Like if you're trying to overdo sarcasm, you might sound like an asshole.
Right.
If you're trying to be too funny, you sort of get perceived as very cringy. So like keep it like toned down, I guess.
So all of these things we mentioned may require some amount of planning
and training.
and
Most of us are sort of trained in certain ways of behaving, so that not all of us can naturally speak in different voices. Not all of us can naturally tell a joke just spontaneously, just like that. So you would have to reconcile with the fact that some of this might not come naturally, and you have to train it. You have to learn some of this.
And I have a very specific example for this. So like I mentioned, Darko and I both gave a pair presentation together, and of course, for him, no script or whatever was necessary because he was like very spontaneous on stage and things like that. But what helped me was just make a very small script and have at least a vague plan of how the presentation is how the presentation is planned to flow. And with time, as people do more and more of this, I guess the brain at some point will just like pattern match, and it will become a habit and do it. People will do it subconsciously. But if you are not at the level of Darko and you're at my level or lower, having some amount of script or some amount of plan written or in your mind or whatever, that really helped me. But I feel like I am slowly converging towards being more spontaneous on the stage. Of course, this requires more presentations from my side and more practice. But I feel like once you get to that stage, you can do like most of these things like on the fly.
I feel like, as counterintuitive as it sounds, being spontaneous on a stage or before a group of people, a big one, let's say, really requires practice. Like spontaneity requires practice. I know how weird that sounds, but for me it was like that. The more I speak publicly, the more I'm comfortable with improvising. Like when I prepare, I always have talking points. Like, of course, each slide has a talking point. I don't necessarily follow what's written on the slide. Sometimes I use them as sort of like, let's say, a waypoint guide, what comes next? What should I speak about next? But beyond that, I don't really prepare. I don't really memorize what I'm trying to say. The whole idea is that when you're on stage, you actually know what you're talking about. And that means that even if you didn't have the slides, you still should be able to convey at least the basic ideas. And remember, like, no slides, you don't have a script. And let's imagine, like, you don't even have paper. You're just on stage with a microphone and that's it. So, yeah, I think that the most... my best presentations, at least according to the feedback I've gathered, were the least prepared for. And that's just what works for me. Some that might not work for you or for other people, but in general, I think that we can all agree that it comes down to practice and finding what you're comfortable with, finding your sort of weaker spots, maybe improving them, maybe not, because ultimately you have to be authentic and genuine. You can't really fake something. As time passes, you can sort of expand your range of authenticity, of course, because you're more accustomed to certain ideas. But that again requires practice.
Right.
So time, practice, patience.
Yeah, it's definitely like riding a bike.
Yeah, essentially it's that.
If you waste processing power in your mind and keep thinking about how you should keep pedaling or thinking about the wheel, that will just it will drain a lot of energy from you, and at the same time it will also block you from focusing on your goal, which is in the case of riding a bike, get from point A to point B. But in the case of public speaking, deliver an information or a message. And so, yeah, the more spontaneous you are, I think the more freedom, the more power, for lack of a better word, you have to transfer your information.
Yeah. Okay, so let's try something even more practical. So when you're trying to prepare for a presentation, what's your tech stack? What are you preparing presentations in?
So actually, the worst one, the worst people can imagine, or was at least. Usually start. So Vim is my favorite editor, and I usually start with like a very high level script. So Vim is not worst, but I will get to the worst part. And now,
if you say PowerPoint, I'm not going to be your friend. Come on,
that's
man.
it.
Not cool.
PowerPoint or Google presentations.
I'm joking, of course. No.
I actually learned a couple of other tools, like the one you used most recently in DevCon, and I really liked that one. It also had like collaborative feature. What was the name? Canva. Yeah. It also had like collaborative features and things like that, and can navigate in different directions throughout the slides. So I really love that one. Still have not used it. I used it together with you, but I have not used it myself.
Yeah.
So I am switching from the worst, which is PowerPoint, to Canva, hopefully for my next talk. But the very first thing I'm doing is just like run Vim, flush the ideas that are in my mind and try to create some presentations of. And that's actually very interesting because I feel like we did the same with the topics of discussions on this podcast even. But and yourself?
I'm always starting with Markdown. Like I'm writing the high level ideas on Markdown. Sometimes those end up as the actual slides, sometimes they don't. But for actual slides, I've used like Excalibur, I've used Canva, I've used Slides slid.es. I've used Google Slides, but that was like a long time ago. Then I've used a bunch of Markdown converters that actually produce, actual slides, PDF slides from your Markdown. But I find myself gravitating towards Canva more because there's like a ton of templates. I don't have to think about, the design that much. And, it's not that good design is necessary, but I like good design. I like things to look consistent. I like good typography. I like stuff like decent readability at a distance. So with Canva, I don't really have to invest that much time with it because there are ready-made templates. Like click something, and this is not paid promotion, far from it, but it's a decent tool for that, is what I'm trying to say. A decent tool to visualize certain stuff. So Markdown, and while I'm doing the Markdown, I'm sort of making some mental notes and some actual notes about the talking points. Then I'm converting those into slides, regardless of the tool. Then it's rehearsals, and then the actual presentation. Like that's vaguely how my process goes.
Yeah. I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you think of this podcast, and how does it, in the sense of public speaking? Do you view it as public speaking, or is it something like entirely different?
It's a recording. Like if this was a live stream, for example, that would have probably counted as public speaking.
Okay.
If it's a recording, it's sort of a different ball game. It's ultimately what you're producing ends up in public, of course, but it's not live. It's I think that probably the distinction there is the live factor, whether you're actually doing it in real time or not. That's probably, like, for me personally, the differentiator is of whether I'm doing public speaking or not.
So if it were live, this would give an imaginary audience, let's say, it would give them the opportunity to ask questions and be involved into the topic and things like that.
Exactly, yes. And most live podcasters, streamers do have these like live chat boxes, or sometimes they allow people on calls and stuff like that. So there is that factor of audience engagement and like interacting with.
No, I mean, definitely this recording will be up on YouTube and different mediums, so people will be able to leave comments in asynchronous fashion. But I sort of, I think I agree on that take where this is still a form of public speaking that we're like recorded one, but for it to be complete, let's say, I guess the live factor is crucial, because so that you get all of the things that we discussed earlier about, you know, reading the audience, engaging them, and things like that.
Yeah. Cool. So do we have anything else to cover?
Yeah, I think we have extracted tons of stuff for this one. Nothing comes to my mind right now.
Frankly, neither for me. Like, I think we passed the entire spectrum of public speaking for now, at least. If we get any questions or anything, we're happy to answer them, of course. So, yeah, with that, I would like to extend my thanks for everybody that listened to this episode. Follow us on YouTube, on our websites, on everywhere we have around. This has been Boro. I've been Darko, and thank you for watching this. See you on the next one.
Thank you. Bye.